here we are for the second of my chats with wonderful choral experts from around the world. We spoke with John Rutter and Bob Chilcott last month, and this month we have Dr. Anton Armstrong and Dr. André Thomas, two of the true heavyweights of choral music in the USA. Thank you for joining me, gentlemen. It's a great pleasure and honor to be with you.
It is ours.
It's good to be with you as well.
I suppose, first of all, I wanted to say, of course, here we are in lockdown, and it doesn't seem as though coronavirus is going anywhere just yet. So we're all engaged with lots of virtual choir projects. And in your opinion, are these things that you've come to love or come to loathe, the virtual choir?
I'm going to ask you to repeat that again because you froze up at one point.
Virtual choirs, do you love them or loathe them?
I'm going to let my dear friend answer because I did some last spring and they were easy, but he's doing a whole Advent concert with his a visiting appointment at Yale University. So let me have him start with that wonderful response.
It's so much work. It is so much work. I went into it kicking and screaming and claiming that it was my age, that I was too old to have to go through all this and figure out how to make this technology work. And, you know, that I was bemoaning the fact that I wouldn't hear my choir immediately and all of those things. And then I realized, you know, look, here are your cards. These are the cards dealt to you. Do your job. Help make some music with the people who are here. And they've done it. And they progressively have gotten better at it. It's a group from 16 to 88. So with that large sort of combination, technology was not a friend to several. But we made it through. We're still in production. So it's going to happen December 12th. So that's how I feel about virtual choirs. I feel it's what we've got. And we're going to make it work, you know.
Last spring, we were, when the pandemic hit really forcefully here in the US, we were scattered and we had to send our students away. And so I was involved in a couple of projects. And I was fortunate that while the students wanted to make some type of music. And so they did it, and they did it beautifully. And I'm fortunate to have colleagues here in a broadcast media center at Chorale College who could put all that together. Now, the one that I wasn't expecting was another gift from my dear friend, Dr. Thomas. So I was marking my 30th year as, on the faculty here at St. Olaf College and as conductor of the St. Olaf Choir. And unbeknownst to me, several of my colleagues here reached out to André, and they asked if he would write a piece for that 30th anniversary. And he chose not to necessarily arrange another spiritual, but he chose a piece that was one of the favorite pieces of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And it talks about life of service, and he was honoring me with that piece. What I didn't know is that between he and my colleagues here at St. Olaf, they were able to create a virtual performance of that piece with André at the piano, my colleague Chesva Manamanegehu, a former student of André's, as the tenor soloist, and the St. Olaf Choir singing this piece. And they surprised the dickens out of me, even to drop into my home. And I was still in my bathrobe when this happened. And under some guise of a discussion, Chesva opens the computer, and all of a sudden I see my students and I see André and his lovely wife, Portia, and they perform this piece. And so it has been a challenge, but I've not had quite the same challenge, but I've also had the rewards of what a virtual choir can, and the joy a virtual choir can give people.
Thank you. Would you both say that even after the virus lifts, do you think virtual choirs are with us to stay? And can they ever take the place of a live performing ensemble? Or is it just a way that we can be even more inclusive with the way that we send choral music out into the world?
Well, I don't know, once we get to the pandemic, how many more virtual choirs there might be. But certainly having the tool of being able to have people submit their recordings to you um, makes a whole different kind of, how can you call it, evaluation. If I was teaching, they wouldn't be embarrassed because there would be nobody around. I knew exactly what they were doing. Um, and um, and so I think we will use it as a tool to continue. Um, that is, if we completely get out of this environment.
I would agree. Yeah, and I would agree. I think I never thought I would have to do a Zoom, and for years, Eric Whitaker with his virtual choir thing. Now we've all figured out we can do virtual choirs. It may be a way of making music globally in a way that we hadn't done so before. It does not replace the in-person contact between singers, the sense of community that is built, the need to, I think the great thing about what choral music does, it's one of the last vehicles in society where people actually have to come together and listen to one another to make something beautiful happen. And I don't think the virtual choir can replace that. But as André just said, I think it can be a wonderful way of enhancing our pedagogical skills with our singers and offering a way of people communicating with each other across the world.
I find that I had to recreate ways to build community.
Yeah, and you must have found, particularly with your position with ACDA at the moment, you must have had to pivot hugely as an organization to continue with your mission during these difficult times.
Well, we planned 2 conferences. I planned a conference that was going to be live, and all of a sudden it wasn't just making that conference fit virtually, it's replanning that conference so that it will work virtually. There were things that we had planned that could not happen online. So it's a whole new kind of thing. But I know I keep sounding perpetually optimistic, but it's what we have. And so I think it'll be of value. I certainly think it will be of value, as I think everything else is. I think people, though, are listening to most of the performances you will see on the ACDA conference will be performances prior to COVID. But when you see the performances, except I think the King Singers are performing, and that's going to be after COVID.
Yeah.
But you guys in Britain have lots of flexibility, more flexibility than we have here.
Yeah. So Chris, I think one of the things that we didn't even quite point out when you say about being able to create more inclusive choral environments through Zoom and through these virtual choirs. Andre's situation up at Yale right now, yes, he's directing the group that is known as the Yale Camerata, but that group in the past has been a town and gown group about based there in New Haven. He has singers from all over the country. Do you have people internationally in that choir this year?
I have one lady who stays up 12:30 midnight from Paris to get rehearsals. And then I have some in California, some in Arizona, some in Alabama. Many of those people are alumni of the Camerata. They graduated from Yale, and now we were able to have them here, which is a joy. Plus, these kids, we have service project for the inner city schools in New Haven. Well, most of the public schools would probably be considered inner city schools. But anyway, we have a special project called the Morse Chorale. And I'm going to feature them on the Advent concert. But 8 of those singers in that chorale, plus their director, singing in the Camerata with me right now. So that we will lose when we become live again.
Yeah, and I think it's fascinating that the forum that we have now does allow us to send out our music and also bring music back in from anywhere in the world. And the King Singers have been doing some online projects that I've been keeping an eye on. In Phoenix, we're trying to put together a project where we're going to allow audience members virtually to sing with us and my program in Redlands in California is scattered all across the stage, and it was envisaged as a virtual degree in many ways from the word go. So we've been able to pivot quite easily, and I wonder whether, although some of us were quite grudging about the idea of virtual choirs to start with, it's actually taught us that there's a wonderful means of communicating with singers far and wide and allowing them access which perhaps they couldn't have before. And with the development of low latency video feeds, where we have the hope of being able to perform in real time across the screen. We can't do it on Zoom, but other programs, I know, wouldn't that be wonderful? I'm hoping that elements of it will be here to support a return to the live singing. I wouldn't want to see purely online singing, but I think the symbiosis could develop very nicely.
I have to say, though, I've been fortunate this fall. You know, if we took very stringent. We had stringent requirements, but we were able to sing together in live in person. I had to conduct one of my ensembles in two halves most of the semester. The Chorale choir was divided into two halves, and then I had 30 minutes to put 5 pieces together. But it was successful, and we were 9 feet apart and masked. But it was, I think, for the psychological, emotional support that gave our students, it was very important to them. And I'm glad the institution I work for made some educated guesses and risks, and that we started school 3 weeks early. And as you and André are talking, it's 2 days before American Thanksgiving. But we are concluding our term as of today, and we were able to make it through. And the music making activities, both instrumentally and vocally, were successful, and they were not sources of any sort of COVID on our campus. Learning a lot of different ways, the virtual, that we still make with precautions. We can make music together, no audiences, but these have been video taped, and they will be streamed later in December. So I think it's a combination of both, and certainly the work André is doing at Yale is a great testimony to what can happen and what other people will do, and I think we go forward. But I really do want to see where we're at and where we come out after this. That's my, what's my end game? That I want us to be able to come back together and sing together. But we now have, with this virtual world, it's highly expanded, and we've opened the world.
It is. It's a different world from how I'm sure any of us envisaged when we started on our careers. And I wanted to ask you, how has the US choral scene in particular changed since you both started on your journeys all those years ago? And how did you first become to be involved with choral music, each of you? Where did you find your calling?
Go ahead.
Well, my calling started way before I knew it was a calling. It started for me in church, obviously, and I'm 4 years old, so I didn't consider it a calling. I considered it, oh, that's music, and I came home and I banged and played it. So that was the beginning of that. Life has changed immensely in public school, but then going to the University of Illinois, where Anton and I met. It was Harold Decker that really introduced me to ACDA. And he gathered the two of us and said, we're going to this conference, and I want you to sit right here, right next to me. And I want you to see how choral music works. He's busy giving critiques about every performance and introducing us to people. And then I realized, where's Anton? Anton's left. So Harold and I spent the rest of the conference together. But that was an introduction, and we were just the two kids, that were in ACDA. And our paths continued along their lines with different opportunities because of ACDA, I would say. And then we continued to teach and learn, and we see an ACDA incredibly evolved from the ACDA that we came into as young people. And they're the leaders. Yeah, the people we've cultivated have become leaders. So that's gratifying. That's gratifying, knowing that there is energy, that the organization will continue no matter what. Pandemic, conferences, lawyers, hotels, all of that, we will still be here. And there's there are a group of people ready to take the reins.
It is an extraordinary organization. I mean, we don't have, we have the ABCD, the Association of British Choral Directors, but and it's a wonderful organization. But ever since my first regional conference, which I attended with the King's Singers many years ago, I've always been in awe of the organizational capability and the power and the strength of ACDA, really to change people's lives and to provide that structure for choral.
I do want to make, we had a common beginning.
Yeah.
André and I had a common beginning. It was also in my church that I had that opening to choral music. The people who were heading the church music program where I grew up in Long Island, New York, were graduates of Westminster Choir College, and they brought that vision of a community of faith that sang literally from the crib to the grave. Had a graded choir program, and as a boy, I sang the American Boy Choir because of these people taking me there and the church supporting me with scholarship money and the such. And I had the joy of coming to a place like St. Olaf College and singing the St. Olaf Choir when I was a student. A lot of opportunities, but it really was going. And while I'm grateful, always will be grateful for the tutelage of Harold Decker and our teachers at University of Illinois, the greatest gift is the friendship that has been with André these 42 years. And I just want to make one point clear. I didn't totally play hooky at that 1980 conference when I was supposed to be by Dr. Decker's side with André. I was meeting my own people where I needed to meet them. So, I didn't play hooky. I was in sessions. I just kind of went off. I was a baby. I was just doing things on my own. So I did that. But yeah, we've had a wonderful career. Our lives have been parallel in many ways. But as André said, ACDA keeps nurturing new generations. And we're in an exciting time now. I'm so proud that André will become next summer the president of ACDA. He will be the first African American to hold that position. And at a time when we are looking at issues of racism, not just in this country, but throughout the world, to have a man of his stature, of his compassion, of his artistry at the helm, and he's just wisdom to give. And sometimes folks just want to react and do things, and he brings a steady hand of leadership. He spent his life nurturing young lives and encouraging folks to open new doors. And so that's what he continues to do in this role as one of the main leaders of ACDA in this country. And I think ACDA has been a model for many organizations. There's some wonderful European organizations. We mostly have the most diversity of membership, of types of choirs that that are under the umbrella of ACDA. So as we look forward, and with somebody like him at the helm, I know we're looking forward with open and prosperity for the future.
And it reminds me, I was re-watching the wonderful panel from the Louisiana ACDA, which the two of you were on with Tesfa and also with Jason from Oakwood College. And I think it was you, André, that said that at one point it felt as though you and Anton were the only two Black people who were involved at ACDA. Does it feel extraordinary now to be rising to the top of that organization? And how do you sense it's changed for you to get there?
Oh, you just get old. As you get older, they go, okay, here's this, here's that. I think the main thing that makes it all different is that Anton will talk to you about Helen Kemp, who created a little motto that she allowed us to use on our DVD, Body, Mind, Spirit, Voice. It takes the whole person to sing and rejoice. with all of that in mind, it creates an attitude of service. And if service is indeed in your inside, then you will find ways to serve others and not just yourself. And that's what ACDA has to be. You know, it can't be me becoming the president or now the national vice president or whatever, and using that to further my career. You know, my career is one thing. My service to ACDA is another. That's my service. And I won't use the organization that way. I will only use the organization to help support it and support its growth and to help mentor others that they need space, you know. And there's before, and you reach a point when you get an invitation, you say, you know, that's really nice, and I really wish I could, but I have an ideal person that would be perfect for you. That is, you know, making a way for others. You know, Harold in his own way sort of made his way for us. He stuck us out there. And we learned to swim. We felt a little bit like guppies just being thrown into the lake. But we learned to swim.
Yeah, and I would just add to that, I'm glad he brought up Helen Kemp. This is a woman who, in her lifetime, she lived to be 97 years old, and she was still sending out emails the day she went to heaven, helping somebody else with their children's choirs. And she was known for her work in that way. But André was quite right. Her motto of body, mind, spirit, voice, to take the whole person, sing and rejoice, was a clear message about servant, spirit leadership. It was about nurturing, and it was more than about winning, getting to go to a conference and singing at a regional or national conference, or getting a superior in your state music education conferences. It was about how music could be a way to reach into the souls of human beings and to make a transformational difference in the lives of people. And I think that is sometimes what we have to be reminded why we are in this business. It's not, as André said, not to bring glory and acclaim to ourselves, but can we nurture other people? Can we help to transform lives? And I'm going to come back to the point I made earlier. I think in music, especially choral music, it's one of the last platforms where people actually can have different views on religion, or on politics, on whatever, and yet they can come together and they can listen to one another and they can make something beautiful. It's one of the last spaces on this earth that can happen. And I would hope that as we go forward and as another generation rises and they lead, that they can remember that. Sometimes we can get so wrapped up in the perfection of a choral art and we forget why we have this gift and how we use this gift. You know, not only those who perform, but those who listen, that their lives are transformed through that act.
Absolutely. And I think that is the important message, to try to inspire, entertain, educate in equal measure to as many people as possible. And having gone online with the Phoenix Chorale, you know, we were blessed as an organization to have both of you leading the chorale over the last 2 Christmases. And this season we've had to go online, as have so many people across the nation and across the world. But we found that the reach that we had for our October broadcast was 10 times the reach that we have for a normal in-person concert series. And we have to wonder whether there were different people watching us online to the people who may come to our regular performances. And in which case, how do we tap into that audience and welcome them through our doors? Are we being true to our word of wanting to have inclusion at the forefront of what we do, and to provide the access and the opportunity to as many people as possible? And I think if we have that watchword of just really trying to speak to as many people as we possibly can, whatever their background might be, that really should be how we champion our organization moving forwards. And looking at the leadership of ACDA and doing that, it's very inspiring. How did you both find working with the chorale when you were in Phoenix for the last 2 festive seasons? Anton, you went first. How did you find it?
Well, They were such a great group. I have to admit, it was at the end of a semester. I had just finished the Salem Christmas Festival. I mean, I was exhausted, quite frankly. And so to leave cold Minnesota and go to sunny Phoenix, that in itself was a joyous experience. But no, they were so welcoming. In a year of unknowns for them, they were going through, you know, the four of you who were finalists plus myself, and it was the 60th anniversary year. They were so welcoming. They were so, and I have to give incredible kudos to Kevin Kriegel, who at that time was the assistant director and had to do a lot of preparation that year. I've never had a group so well prepared. You know, I give, you know, scan scores to people all the time when I guest conduct, but he prepared that group to fairly well, but they were flexible and they were so open to what we were trying to do. And the music, I intentionally did make the music maybe as difficult because I knew I had a limited amount of rehearsal time with them. But I wanted to make music that they could not have to just wrestle with. They were going to have to get used to a new conductor and possibly different ways, even though Kevin just prepared them to the nth degree for me with my markings. But they were so receptive, and we tried things. I remember when we finally got to the last section of the program, which were favorites I knew the audience would know, and I did the Wilhowski Carol of the Bells. And in rehearsal, all of a sudden I said, they don't need me. So I just said, y'all gonna do this. When the sopranos started, and they sang that by themselves. And I think just the pride, you know, there wasn't a conductor up in front of them. They didn't need that conductor. And there was a level of trust. From the very beginning, I didn't feel like I was the outsider coming in. They opened the door, and there was a level of trust. And this one, I was able to do a piece that I had asked André to write for the Salem Choir back in 2011 when we were celebrating the 100th anniversary of our Christmas festival. And Jen and your staff found a wonderful steel drum player, and we had a good time. And it was a celebration, and every night was a different concert venue. Now I'm used to that for 30 years of touring the Salem Choir, you know, 2-week tours. I know that was a little different for André at one point. I had to get used to that. But you know, maybe also I will say that the oh, your folks are gonna kill me later. I'll just say it anyway. One of the venues was out in Sun City, and it's an enclave of many folks from the Midwest, especially a lot of Lutherans. And I haven't taken the Salem Choir to Sun City in years. We will always come maybe downtown Phoenix or something like that. So when we went back to that Lutheran church in Sun City, the Phoenix Chorale helped me to reestablish a connection with a community that I think was sometimes a little annoyed with me. And we had just a joyous experience. It really was. It was a real highlight for me.
Good. I'm so pleased to hear you say that. And I've watched both of your performances on video many times, and we've put together a selection to go out on our broadcast on the 19th of December. And it does include that wonderful unconducted performance of the Carol of the Bells, Anton. And you're right, they've got such spirit as singers. And I fell in love with the sound that they make from the first moment that I heard them, really. And I know that they were very fond of working with both of you as well. André, how did you find it last Christmas?
Well, it was fun, challenging. Some of the music was harder than I think we had anticipated that it would be. But they rose to the occasion. They were great. The attitude was splendid. This is not at all the first professional choir I've dealt with, and I've dealt with a number of professional choirs throughout Europe, so I know what attitudes can be. And this choir, they were lovely, as Anton said, and so I appreciated it, and they embraced anything I asked them to do. They just embraced it and they went for it. You know, I just had to make sure they didn't go so far over that I lost them because they've gone trying so hard to do it. But they were great. So I would echo Anton's feelings.
I'm glad.
Hey, Chris, I can just add one thing.
Yeah.
Chris, I can just add one thing to that, because and André brings up in his always diplomatic and tactful way. I think one of the things that just grabbed me was, yeah, I've not maybe as many as my dear colleague did, but I've conducted a number of professional choirs here and abroad. It was their openness of heart. It was, they had a Phoenix Chorale has a servant spirit as part of who they are. And I think when André and I both could go in with what we have lived by and what we try to do, and we find that, that I think is one of the responsive chords. There's some professional groups, you know, sometimes they're project choirs, sometimes they are resident groups, but that they can have an attitude. And there was a humbleness of spirit in the Phoenix Chorale people. And that's why I think both of us could go in there and make music and not just feel like we were just entertaining and create music, but that we could really create music and share music with that yearned for this, you know. And that is one of the distinctive elements of Phoenix Chorale. It is a group of singers who have servant spirits in making their music.
I haven't seen the videos of the experiences, both of our experiences, but I would say to you that it was, the other joy was they didn't pick and determine which music they felt they should significantly give themselves to. They gave themselves to every piece of music. Yep. And so it was not that. And the spirit in which they sang it, I think, transmitted itself to the audience. And at least to me and how I felt about it.
I would totally agree. Yep.
It's lovely to hear you say these things, because I think for me, the chorale is a choir which is very much for and of its community. And the individual members are Phoenix local people, a couple from out of the city, but mostly very local. And they give such passion and dedication to what they do. And I felt such a deep sense of community from the first moment that I flew in, and it reminded me of the choirs that I sang in when I was a child. And when I finished in my cathedral choirs when I was about 13, I entered into a patch of, 25, 30 years where I was singing with professional session singers and professional session choirs, and later with the King's Singers, and it almost became a bit of a job in many ways. And I loved it, and I enjoyed what I was doing and the level at which I was fortunate to do it. But coming to Phoenix almost felt chorally a bit like coming home, because it reminded me that actually what we do is all about that heart and that spirit and that soul. And I feel so privileged to work with them regularly, and I'm looking forward to going back.
Chris, can I make a point? And André had even more contact with this person than I did. But you bring to mind, and I think what made that group special in my mind, is that they are true amateurs, okay? And I want to go back to how Robert Shaw used that word and understood that word as the true lover of the arts, okay? They perform at a professional level of artistic excellence, but they haven't lost the joy and the love of the art. And it's not just their gig, it's their passion.
Yeah.
And they are amateurs in the best sense of that word. I hate that we've a little bit taken a Eurocentric view of that term as people who are second rate in some ways. No, I've been quoted saying I'd rather produce 10,000 amateurs any day than 10,000 professionals. And that group has the heart of the amateur and the skill of professional.
That's a good quote. We're going to use that one. Thank you. So in your experience of traveling around the world and working with other choirs, would you say that there's a very sort of traditional American choral sound? And the reason I ask really, I suppose, is I heard that wonderful performance of the Aeolians in Kansas City last year, and I heard a choral sound that I don't think I've experienced anywhere else in my life. Hearing them sing Bach was absolutely extraordinary. And I think before then I'd had the concept in my mind that there's a very much an American choral sound, but I think in fact it's a melting pot of choral sounds, isn't it, in the US? I think in England we have quite a strict way of doing things, but in America it's so vibrant and alive.
It always has been. We're in the midst of a project that Jerry Blackstone is doing now, talking about choral music in America. And that's one of the things that we're going to film next week from here. The American sound has always been complex. You know, or we're talking about the American choral sound. We're talking about university choirs. Are we talking about historically Black colleges and what that sounds like? What's the sound like with gospel music? What's the sound like with country music? We are indeed this incredible melting pot. We are constantly always being influenced. I remember the day quite clearly, you know, as much as I do love Eric, but I remember the day we went from Cloudburst into some of his other music that sort of developed this sort of ethereal 11s and 13s, that a lot of the sound was, okay, we need to maybe look at a European model in our ear. They would never admit that's what they were doing, but they were looking at a European model to do some of this music. And that began, you know, all of a sudden, you know, choirs went like this with no vibrancy, just all straight, you know. Yeah. And which is different because that's not really exactly the European model, depending on which country you are. You find, you know, in many countries, a more vibrant sound from the tenors and basses, and the treble voice is not. And so that kind of model influenced it. In the early years, John Finley Williamson brought his choir there. They needed to be able to sing with the New York Philharmonic. That sound of Westminster came about, and it influenced Anton's school. St. Olaf did the same thing. They went on tours. People began to listen to the sound and began to incorporate that sound. So we've always been constantly in flux, okay? And even when one sound predominates, there's always somebody else over here that's also getting attention. So I think the only thing that makes it more American than anything else is probably the accent. I mean, I have one student at Yale, quite talented. Her name is Gloria Yin, but she was born in the UK. Okay, if you can imagine this small Asian woman with a very strong UK accent, very quickly, you know. Oh. And then, you know, I have Michael, who comes from New Zealand, from Perth, Australia. And between the two of them going, okay, then constantly they'll say to the group, go ahead, use an American on this, okay? Don't try to do our whatever. And it's like, oh, wow. So if there is an American sound, it has to do with language.
Yeah.
And language.
Yeah, and I would agree with that. And I think to the point, Chris, yeah, you heard the Aeolians, but what has happened, for instance, let's just use ACDA, it has happened over the years. And maybe part of that is André and I came just of age at a time when ACDA was willing to really open its doors a little bit more and let people who could bring in different viewpoints into the organization. But all that time, there was great choral music happening in historically Black colleges in this country, except the ACDA doors were not always open to those folks. You know, André and I crashed through a different way, and we were able to open some of the music of our people. And we were invited to do all states and we could start doing that. And André, certainly in all those years at Florida State, I think if he tallies up, that school has produced more PhDs and doctoral people who have gone on in the field of choral music out of the African American community, out of the Latin community, out of the international community than any school in the United States. And they are now, as André said, they're now in the leading point and they're lifting that up. But when we have looked at it, ACD is now just starting to really look in the last 10 or 15 years at really allowing those voices to come. And I think the composition, as the global music scene became more apparent in the US, you find choirs trying to do different things. And the one thing Shaw talked to us and told us about is that you look to the composition, and that will help direct the tonal quality of that. And so people have been willing to do that much more. But I also agree with André in the sense that, yeah, for a while, a school like St. Olaf had, and the Lutheran schools, made this more European-based sound. Well, there are a lot of choirs around this country that sound a lot more European. I'd never have used the word blend or straight tone in my rehearsals, ever, okay? And there are a lot of choirs that sound a heck of a lot like the old St. Olaf choir, and that restrained vibrato and whatever. And I hope we can get away from trying to have this sort of sound and let people be people. Take the voices you have. When I came to work with Chorale, I didn't try to, and I know André does either. I didn't try to input a sound on them. I picked repertoire, and they're facile and smart singers. It's the way I cook. I like a lot of different. I don't like salt and pepper alone. I'm from the island. I like my spices. And so when we got to André's piece, when we got to a couple of other things, I wanted a different sound for those pieces than from what the Mendelssohn sounded like, you know, and whatever. We search for what has to be, and not just a sound, but what does the score say we need to try to use in the tapestry of tonal sound that we have.
I think for us, it's you know, I remember the very first ACDA conference I went to, and the Bulgarian women came over to sing. That was something, you know, they do folk music, and that was, you know, we were like, whoa.
He'll paint off the wall with that sound.
and some of our good generation above us, age people that we're having to be sitting with was, oh, I'll never have to clean out my ears again. I didn't know what that's going to be. You know, so you got the Bulgarian, you know, then you got Maria coming in and say, okay, here's, let's go. And okay, let's go. And you make the changes. One of the things that's really quite interesting is sometimes people will ask you if they're not sure about what they want to do. I'm working with Rundfunkchor Berlin, and they said, Maestro, do you want this in English or American? And I have to say, I want it in American. Repeat after me. And that was the end of it, because then, you know, that's okay. If I do this in American, how does it sound in American? Well, you can't use that bright ah that you're using right now. And so, okay, now drop off that R, you know, yeah, and drop off that T, you know, you'll be fine. Life will go on. And all of a sudden, then you get at what sounds American, as best as Americans can sound French.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, it's, for me, I look at the origin of the text. So if I'm working with a chorale and I'm singing a piece of, let's say, Herbert Howells, then I might ask them to sing English. But if we're singing a piece which has, I love the poetry of Sarah Teasdale, and it's been set so beautifully by so many composers over the years. And if we're singing a piece where the text is by her, then I want them to sound like an American choir, because they're interpreting the Americanness of the text in many ways. So I think if we can be led by the origin of the text, we can find nuance even within the same language with the different origins within it.
And when I said score before, it wasn't just music. I mean the text as well.
Yeah,
you're guided by those sounds, but you also have to go to the degree that your singers can adjust. With young college students, when I first did Sarah Hopkins' Past Life Melodies, and I had actually conducted in 1995 the choir she wrote it for, the St. Peter's Lutheran Chorale over in Brisbane, Australia. And those kids living amongst Aboriginals, they create a sound. I couldn't quite create that same sound with the St. Olaf choir when we did it, but I know it couldn't be the more typical St. Olaf choir sound. But you know, I've had, even over the years, I remember in 1999, I would never do this again to myself, but I recorded 2 albums within about 3 weeks of each other. One was our first Great Hymns of Faith album, and you hear a very typical St. Olaf choir sound. then I was asked by the Neil Cho's company to record as part of the centennial observation of the birth of William Dawson, an album of Dawson spirituals. And I was also within a week and a half of vocal juries and sing-alongs. So I couldn't like muck around with these kids' technique a whole lot without having 10 other voice faculty down my back. But I redid the seating arrangement. I did something I don't often do enormously in block formation. We sang in a scattered formation. I put voices I might not put in certain places, but I got a sound. I don't know, when people talk about authenticity, I do not understand authenticity, okay? Because I just played a recording of the founder of this choir doing one of his works. And I played it for my conducting class the other day. Now, I said, this is authentic. And they looked at it and went, but can you replicate the music? Can you create the music with integrity? That's what you heard with Jason's Aeolians when they did the Bach. Mm. They didn't try to sound like the Thomanacor, but they sang the piece with integrity. He understood performance practice. That was replicated. But you heard such different ingredients in that vocal sound. I think if Bach had heard that, he would be flipping for that wig or whatever he wore, you know? So yeah. I think can we open our ears and our minds in the 21st century that there are different ways that this music can be heard and can be heard with integrity, but we don't have to be so much box ourselves in, and that we can't hear things with new delight.
Agreed. Here. Thank you. That's fascinating. That's a fascinating.
I want to go back to one other thing real quick, Chris. Yeah. I want to say one of the things that I did so enjoy about being with the chorale is that when we finished each one of the Christmas concerts, the chorale walked outside, and I did too, and we greeted every audience member.
Yeah.
That, I kept thinking, oh my God, we're going to really do this. But yeah, and most people were kind enough to say, I've enjoyed it, someone, it didn't matter that was, again, a connection of the ensemble to community.
Yeah.
And that's one of the special things that they do that I thought made this holiday concert special.
I'm so glad you remember that. Yeah, because that was the same case. I'm used to going upstage to get out of my clothes. And Jen said, no, you got to go out and, and when I had to really go to the bathroom bad, but it was like, okay, stayed out there, met those people, and it really did. I hadn't done that. Where I've done that before was when I had the singing choir in Japan and Korea. And we went outdoors, and the people just swarmed the kids, and they swarmed me, But André, I'm so glad you said that, because that really is a distinctive thing. And I think you're right. It points to the heart of the chorale and how they can connect with their community.
And I think although I'm sure they do it for other concerts as well as this, but for me, what hit me was at this time of the year, at this time of the year where we're looking at the birth of the Christ child, we're also looking at the state of the world, that music is healing. It's like the balm that the slaves called the balm in Gilead, to heal the sin-sick soul. That's what music does. And when that occurred, and then that same giver of the gift then shares a little bit of themselves with the people who receive the gift, it magnifies it. So it was a brilliant idea. So tell Jan, thank you. It worked.
I shall, and I love that too. We do it after every concert, and to me it feels very normal because it's something we always do with the King Singers as well. And I think I forget that many choirs, if not most choirs, don't tend to do that. But it's certainly something which I want to champion as well as the chorale members, because it's that community feel, as you say. And you've led me neatly on to Christmas, actually, because I think it would be wonderful to finish by just speaking to the importance of music at Christmas. André, you've spoken about the balm of Gilead, and the way that we celebrate the birth of the Christ child through music. What would be some of your favorite Christmas experiences that have involved music down the years, the ones that have really spoken to you?
Well, let me start, and then I'll let André chime in. I mean, in these 30 years, I've been artistic director of the Chorale Christmas Festival, and because of opportunities we've had to share that publicly through public television as well as radio. It's been a program that I think has impacted people. I think some other schools have modeled their holiday programs based on that. But our whole thing in that is that we know people come, certainly the 12,000 people who come over 4 days to the campus to hear the live concerts. And some are alumni, some are family, their parents of kids in the ensembles. But there are a lot of folks who just have now, you know, when we were growing up, there was the Bing Crosby Christmas specials and the Andy Williams Christmas specials. Well, this has become something that families can watch. I mean, I got identified on a plane one time. This guy kept staring at me. I thought, what's wrong with you? And finally, he looked at me and said, I know who you are. You're that man that my wife makes me watch at Christmas time. But you look different. Well, I was in jeans and a hoodie, and he's used to seeing me in tux or whatever, okay? But he said, we're not really religious people, but that's the one thing we can look at. I think these Christmas programs allow people, again, come from different paths, beliefs. Maybe they don't believe in a Christ child, but they know there's peace on earth. There should be that. Right now, because we haven't had a live concert, I've spent, and it's finally done, a program that will go out on public radio and also through the stream from St. Olaf, as well as a new PBS special that will have a new PBS special that will come out based on a 2019 concert. But I just did a curated program of a stream that will come from St. Olaf on December 6th. And the title is All Earth is Hopeful. It comes from a Latin American carol, Toda a la Tierra. And it's one of the pieces I did with the Chorale when I was there in 2018. But when we thought we were going to have a live Christmas special, we had a very different theme and a different focus. And when I had to call my colleagues together via Zoom to plan something very different, it was like, can there be hope? Can there be hope after whatever stance you are politically? Will there be hope for this country after an election? Will there be hope in the face of a pandemic that has now taken over 250,000 lives of this country? Will there be hope for a pandemic that there's no vaccine for, called racism? Will there be hope? And I think this time of year, because it's hard why we celebrate Christmas, but it's become such a cultural activity, such a cultural celebration. People tend to open their hearts in a different way. I mean, whether it's the Salvation Army banging their bells and getting, as I go in the grocery store, whether it's whatever, it's a time when people, I think, might have a little bit more willingness to reflect, to reconsider. And I think that music maybe harkens back to some of them, for some folks, back to childhood memories. Some are not always so happy, some are. But it can be a time when we can rethink and we can open our hearts.
Thank you. Andre, beat that.
You know, I think he pretty much exhausted that question. I would tend to agree with him. It's varied experiences. You know, St. Olaf Christmas Festival is the oldest continuing festival of its type. And so all of us were always intrigued by being able to watch it on television initially, you know. And then, of course, when Anton went there, it became even more special because that was my buddy directing that choir, you know. And going out to that first Christmas festival, you know, I had all my protective gear on to protect my friend in this wilderness of a world they called Northville.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, Christmas festival was special, but it was. Well, I think the other thing that I was so surprised, I was so used to seeing it on television, and then when I saw it live, I went, "Oh, we're in a gym." I would have never guessed that on all those years of hearing that festival. Never thought that.
Only place we can fit all those people. So.
But yeah, those experiences are wonderful, you know, and.
Andre, talk about this. You created at Florida State in a secular university. You created special music for the holidays.
Well, we call it seasonal celebration, you know, and we always got one or two complaints, you know, about, well, there's no, I remember, you know, the Jewish community was saying, where's the Jewish music? I said, well, we're doing these excerpts from Judas Maccabeus. Don't you recognize that at all? Okay. I mean, I can't do 10 Hanukkah pieces. But anyway, yeah, seasonal celebration, which is both secular and sacred music. I have no problems combining them all in that way.
I think it is important, and I mean,
is Advent.
For me, it's the same. I mean, I grew up listening to the 9 and watching the 9 lessons and carols at King's College in Cambridge, and you know that's been going for over 100 years now. I managed to get a ticket to attend the BBC filming of that. I think my second year when I was up in Cambridge, and being there in person, I echo your feelings of wonder, Andre, to be there at this event that I'd watched for so many years, in which my friends were now taking part in, was an extraordinary blessing. But I agree. I think it does take us back to our childhoods. It gives us this incredible hope that there's a possibility of renewal with a new year. It's particularly poignant, I know, around election times and when things are changing in America. It's poignant at the moment around important discussions about inclusion and diversity and equity. It's important when we're thinking about a virus and a pandemic and how many people's normal lives have changed so much over the course of this year. And it's a wonderful note on which to close our conversation, I think, with this wonderful message of peace on earth and goodwill to all of mankind. And I've been so blessed by the time we spent together. It's been so enriching to spend this hour hearing about your stories and your pathways and the wonders of the American choral tradition, which as a British director, I'm blessed to be a part of now, and it's a true honor to be part of this choral nation. And I just want to thank you so much for sharing with me today, and I hope to see you in person again, both of you, very soon.
Welcome to the family. Welcome to the American family.
Thank you.
And please give our love to all the members of the chorale and to Jen and all those good people who work behind the scenes to make that group happen. And we just wish you the very best, a long tenure in that.
Thank you, and a happy Thanksgiving to you both.
Before we get off,
Andre?
Before we get off, can you tell us when the concert's going to be broadcast and what's on it?
Absolutely. The concert's going to be broadcast on the 19th of December. The 19th of December, and it's featuring selections from both of your concert performances, featuring some of Andre's arrangements as well, with Andre on the keys, and wonderful Carol of the Bells. And I know it features that wonderful Christ the Apple Tree composition, Stanford Scriven, which you introduced to me, Anton. I hadn't heard of it before, and many others as well. I can't remember the exact listing at the moment, but it's a really lovely selection, and 3 brand new virtual choir performances as well. A couple of audience sing-alongs of favourite carols, which we expect people to sing along to at home, and then a wonderful version of the Christmas song. But it's some of the very best of what both of you did, your artistry with the chorale.